Listen up, weed lovers. It's 420 month, and IndieCloud.co is here to elevate your celebration. Get a massive 42% off all weed, edibles, and vapes for the entire month of April in our biggest sale of the year. This is a special year to celebrate 420, as it marks 6 years since the sale of almost all cannabis products was legalized across the country. This allows IndieCloud to deliver to you dispensary-grade legal products discreetly delivered straight to your door. No medical card needed. IndieCloud has something for everyone. Whether you're a seasoned toker or just starting out, you can explore the world of weed safely with our award-winning Soda Shop Gummy Series, our 12 strains of flower, or our record-breaking selection of vapes. Celebrate 420 responsibly all April with IndieCloud. Discreet delivery, top-shelf products, all month long. Head over to indiecloud.co/spring24, that's C-O, not .com, to snag 42% off your first order.
We are not alone in the universe, and we have proof that we are not. Follow me down the rabbit hole to find out what they are doing at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Hangar 18. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the rabbit hole. I am Danny. As always, I will be walking you through this conspiracy theory. I don't know if it's really a conspiracy theory. It is, because they haven't come out and officially said there's aliens, but we all know that there are. So a big thank you to Fred, who requested this episode on Instagram. I really appreciate it. Guys, if you request an episode, I'm going to do it. So I am changing it up a little bit. So Fred, I apologize. You did request Hangar 18. We're going to cover Hangar 18, but I decided that instead of just covering Hangar 18, it doesn't make sense. We should cover all of the UFOs that happen, all the sightings that happened before Hangar 18 became like the place that everybody took all their things to, right? So that's what I did. I made it a little bit more than what you wanted, but I'm going to cover everything anyway. So we're going to start with Kenneth Arnold. So the UFO craze started in June of 1947 so Roswell happened in July of 1947. In June, a private pilot named Kenneth Arnold saw flying saucers when he was flying near Mount Rainier in Washington State. On June 24th of 1947, Arnold took off from Chehalis, Washington, which is just kind of south of Olympia, just so you kind of have a reference as to where we're talking about. And he was headed for an air show in Pendleton, Oregon, which if you don't know where Pendleton is, it's kind of just south of like Walla Walla, Washington. He had like a planned stop in Yakima, Washington to get like fuel on his way, like just a fuel stop. So, it was all around like an easy trip. He's an experienced pilot, right? So he has like 4,000 hours logged. He was a member of the Idaho Search and Rescue Unit because he liked to fly. This is something that he did in his spare time. He was a businessman when he wasn't like a pilot. He was flying a single-engine Call Air A2 plane. And the skies were clear, the winds were low. It was basically a perfect day to fly. Plus, even if the skies weren't like perfectly clear, it's not like Arnold he'd still know how to navigate and all that. He lives in Washington State. If you've ever been to Washington State, it's gloomy 9 out of the 12 months of the year. It's basically, if it's not actually actively raining, it's gloomy. And well, not in all parts of Washington, on the west coast of Washington. Once you fly over the mountain range, once you're in Yakima area, you have nicer, like pretty standard weather. It's not constantly gloomy over there. But when he took off, he was still on the west side of the mountains. So it would have been, it's more common to be gloomy on that side of the mountains. So but that doesn't matter because it was a beautiful day, perfectly clear. Arnold had planned to detour off his planned route just a little bit because there was a downed plane. So a Marine Corps Curtiss C-46 Commando had crashed just east of his planned course. So he was like, cool, I'm just going to go check it out. And he was hoping that he would find the plane and claim the $5,000 reward money. And just so you have a reference, $5,000 in 1947 is about $65,000 right now. So that's like a pretty good amount of money. Just before about 3 p.m., Arnold was circling just about 20 miles west of Mount Rainier. And for reference, Mount Rainier is just about splitting Chehalis and Yakima. So it's basically right in the middle. So, and he had planned for this. So he was going to go check for that down plane, land in Yakima, get some more fuel, go on to Pendleton to the air show. You know, it was all good. He was ready. And that's when he saw a bright flash to the northeast. And he said, quote, "It startled me. I just assumed it was some military lieutenant out with a shiny P-51, and I had caught the reflection of the sun hitting the wings of his plane," end quote. Then, like, more flashes started to come. And this time, he knew it wasn't really a plane. He saw 9 shiny objects flying in an echelon formation just about 5 miles long. And he described them as circular, maybe about 100 feet in diameter, and with no discernible tail, which was weird because every plane that he had seen had a tail. So something with no tail would be odd, especially 1947. And remember, planes are kind of new. And the objects would periodically like flip or bank or weave side to side. He described the movement, quote, like the tail of a Chinese kite, which is kind of a cool thing to think about. And as the formation crossed in front of Arnold, he decided to time it. He was like, let's see just how fast this weird 9 object formation thing is flying. So he timed its passage from Mount Rainier to Mount Adams. And he was trying to calculate how fast the formation was flying. He knew how far, like the distance. And we kind of talked about this with Flight 19. If you know the distance and you know the direction, then you can calculate how fast they're flying. So this is where some sources differ. Some say that these 9 objects were flying about 1,200 miles per hour, and some say about 1,700 miles per hour. Either way, it's super fast, especially for 1947 when they are not flying that fast. At least 2 times faster than the plane could fly at the time, period. Like, no plane could even fly that fast. And keep in mind that this was still several months out before Colonel Yeager would fly the Bell X-1 700 miles per hour and break the sound barrier. So that hadn't even happened yet. So the fact that a plane couldn't even fly 700 miles an hour yet, and then you have these 9 objects all together flying, let's just call it 1,200 miles an hour on the low end, right? 1,200 miles an hour. And he's like blown away by this. Initially, Arnold thought that these were probably like military aircraft, right? And the military decided to, like, they're like out doing whatever the military does. But the military denied conducting any test flights in the area at the time. None were happening. A prospector on Mount Adams actually saw the objects at the same time as Arnold, which just solidified his story. So when he came forward, he's like, "Oh yeah, I saw it too." That made it like more real. And remember, this is the middle of the day. It's a beautiful, clear day, and he's an experienced pilot, so it's not like he's just making stuff up. Like, it's his first time out there, and he's like, "Oh, what is that in the distance?" No, like, he knows what he's looking for out there. Arnold denies that he would ever use the words flying saucer to describe what he had seen. He did describe the objects as moving, quote, like a saucer if you skip across water. So that's kind of where the people are like, "Oh, saucer, flying, it's a flying saucer." But he was like, "No, I never used those words."
Listen up, weed lovers. It's 420 month, and IndieCloud.co is here to elevate your celebration. Get a massive 42% off all weed, edibles, and vapes for the entire month of April in our biggest sale of the year. This is a special year to celebrate 420, as it marks 6 years since the sale of almost all cannabis products was legalized across the country. This allows IndieCloud to deliver to you dispensary-grade legal products discreetly delivered straight to your door. No medical card needed. IndieCloud has something for everyone. Whether you're a seasoned toker or just starting out, you can explore the world of weed safely with our award-winning Soda Shop Gummy Series, our 12 strains of flower, or our record-breaking selection of vapes. Celebrate 420 responsibly all April with IndieCloud. Discreet delivery, top-shelf products, all month long. Head over to indiecloud.co/spring24, that's CO, not .com, to snag 42% off your first order.
He told his story to East Oregonian newspaper the day after the sighting, and the journalist used the words saucer-like aircraft. And by the afternoon, the tale of flying saucers was spread nationwide, because this is really cool, right? Like, this guy he saw flying saucers. What is that? Like, oh my gosh. And before this, I don't think UFOs or like aliens were really talked about. This was the first time that somebody was like actually mentioning aliens. On June 26th, Arnold was interviewed on a radio show. The interviewer said, quote, "The Associated and United Press all over the nation have been after this story. It's been on every newscast over the air and in every newspaper I know of," end quote. Arnold had become basically a media sensation, even though he really didn't want the attention. But I mean, what else does he think is going to happen when he's going to say that he's seen these flying saucers? After his sightings, though, so many sightings began to pop up all over the US. Finally, it was like an okay thing to talk about, but also I think that some people just like wanted recognition for like what they had may or may not have seen. So that's when Roswell happened. So just a month after Arnold's sighting, not even a month, like 2 weeks maybe, because it was like the beginning. It was just around Independence Day. And this is probably the most famous UFO incident in our history. In the beginning days of July of 1947, about 75-ish miles outside of Roswell city limits, Mac Brazel, a rancher, found something very unusual in his sheep pasture. So it was like this mess of metallic sticks held together with tape, chunks of plastic, foil reflectors, scraps of heavy, glossy paper-like material. And this stretched almost a mile long and hundreds of yards wide. So it wasn't like a small little area that he found all these weird things. It was a big area. And Brazel didn't know what they were, so he just called the sheriff. He was like, something weird is happening here. And keep in mind, like, things had landed in his pasture often. There was the Roswell Army and Air Force Base, like, close. So, you know, they were running tests. They were doing all these things. You have dumb teenagers that are going to come out to your ranch and do whatever. So he was used to picking things up in his pastures, but this was weird. So he called the sheriff. Turns out the sheriff also didn't know what these items belonged to, so he just called the local military base. Soldiers went to the ranch. They fanned out across the field and gathered all the mysterious debris and just took it away with them in armored trucks. I imagine this looked similar to like a FOD walk down on a flight line, if you've ever been a part of that or seen that. Basically, everyone lines up in a line right next to each other, and they just stare down at the ground and walk in a straight line, because then you can't miss anything. If everybody's like shoulder to shoulder, basically, and you don't want anything on the flight line, you don't want anything to get to the engines of the planes. So I'm imagining this is what they're doing in this pasture. They don't want to miss any piece of like weird debris. The next day, they released this statement from the base. It said, quote, "The many rumors regarding the flying disc became a reality yesterday when the intelligence office of the 509th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force Roswell Army Airfield was fortunate enough to gain possession of a disc through the cooperation of one of the local ranchers and the sheriff's office in Chavez County," end quote. But then, on the 8th of July, quote, "RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region," was the top story in the Roswell Daily Record. So, like, news had gotten out. They're like, the base had confirmed that they found something really cool, that it was a flying disc, a flying saucer, you know, because they had all this news very recently, within the last 2 weeks, of this guy in Washington seeing these flying saucers, and now in Roswell we have one in our possession, and everyone's like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. Well, just the next day, on July 9th, the Air Force official clarified that it was not, in fact, a flying saucer, but a crashed weather balloon. Yeah, we lied to you, sorry. Oops, our bad. Although what they were saying wasn't really adding up. So to anyone who had seen the debris or a picture of it, thanks to the local newspaper, it was clear that whatever was found on this pasture, it just wasn't a weather balloon. Like, there's no way it was a weather balloon. During the 1950s, the military conducted a series of tests in the Roswell area. So the Project High Dive was a test of revolutionary parachute. So they would drop dummies using parachutes and then go and retrieve them. So a lot of people think that this was a lame attempt to cover up basically alien bodies. Some people, like witnesses, actually saw bodies of aliens. And when you're comparing, and they kind of compared these dead bodies of these alien bodies to like dummies or dolls, which is like, that's why they were like, oh, well, let's just go ahead and drop these dummies using these parachutes and we'll see if these parachutes work, right? And we'll just do it in the Roswell area just because it seems like a good spot. There's no weird things going on here. We're not trying to cover up anything. We're just doing tests. Well, then between 1966 and 1972, from the military base, they started to test like probes for NASA, and they called this Project Mogul. It's just very convenient that they decided to shape these probes the same way a flying saucer would be shaped. So they were very round, very circular, and it again, a lame cover up because you have all these eyewitnesses. You have the newspaper had taken pictures of these aliens who were actually 3 feet tall, not 6 feet tall dummies. You have these people like, I mean, Brazel at the very least, who had found the wreckage. So you're telling me that it was just these probes from NASA? And at the time, all this stuff was very hush-hush, top secret. So they're like, oh, we couldn't tell you then because it was too top secret, but now it's been declassified, so now we can talk about it. Project Mogul used sturdy, high-altitude balloons to carry low-frequency sound sensors into the tropopause. And they were basically trying to like eavesdrop on the Soviet Union, and they were testing these balloons to see if they could eavesdrop and get like sound waves all the way from Russia in New Mexico, which I feel like if you're gonna eavesdrop on Russia or the Soviet Union at the time, excuse me, like why wouldn't you do it from Alaska? Anyway, and plus there's HARP is up in anyway. They just didn't think this very through. They thought that the general public was dumb is basically what it came down to. The only problem is, and they didn't start these tests until about 20 years after the UFO incident. And Brazel had even mentioned at some point that he had picked up pieces of weather balloons or probes or whatever before, and what he found that day was not the same as a weather balloon, was not the same as a probe. He's found all that wreckage before. This was different, which is why he finally called in somebody, because like all the stuff that he had found before, he could justify. He was like, oh, this makes sense. This looks like a weather balloon. This looks like whatever. But all of a sudden, like what he found that day, it didn't look like anything he had seen before. But that's not all, because on March 25th of 1948, another flying saucer was found. This time, though, it was not flying, it was on the ground, and it looked like it had landed and not exactly crashed. It was about 100 feet in diameter, and some oil workers who were on their way to their job site for the day had found it. So a couple of the witnesses, like, they wouldn't enter the aircraft, but they did approach it, and they were like the younger guys, the younger oil workers. And the foreman, who was like kind of an older guy, he was yelling at those guys that approached it. He was like, stay away from that craft, like don't get close to it. He was freaking out. He's an older guy, you know, he wants to protect the younger guys. The younger guys went up to it, and they found there was no damage besides a shattered porthole. And they looked through the porthole, and they found 2 bodies slumped over. So I'm wondering if these aliens like couldn't breathe our air, which is why like the shattered porthole would have caused them to die. Because if it's not a crashed flying saucer, it was just a landed flying saucer, it's weird that they would be dead, except for the fact that there is a shattered porthole. So that seems to be the only thing in my mind. This is like me thinking through. That seems to be the only thing that would have killed them, is that maybe they just can't breathe our air, which is reasonable. Within hours, of course, the U.S. military showed up to contain the situation. They had learned a lot from their last alien encounter at Roswell, so they covered this one up way better. They started by separating all the civilians, all those oil workers. They separated them away, and then they reminded them of their duty to their country and sworn them to secrecy. And you must remember that at that time, just out of World War II, the sense of patriotism was so high. And if they told you not to talk about something, you just didn't talk about it because most people still trusted the government. The questioning of the government didn't get more widespread until like the 60s with the Vietnam War and the assassination of JFK. So people weren't really questioning if the government says something, especially if the military comes and tells you something, you just do it. According to the witnesses, the army recovered between 14 and 16 badly burned bodies from the disc, and they took everything, the ship, the bodies, to a local safe house away from prying eyes because they didn't want anybody else to see this. They didn't want anybody else to like wander upon it like these oil workers had. And because of the number of bodies at the Aztec site, it is considered one of the most significant UFO retrievals in our history. I bet you've never heard of Aztec, New Mexico UFO incident because those guys just never talked about it until way later, 50 some years later, they finally opened up. But I mean, and that's kind of the theme with UFOs is that everybody's really quiet about it because they were told to be quiet about it. And then all of a sudden they weren't. So this brings us to Hangar 18. Just outside of Dayton, Ohio is Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So this is one of the biggest in the Air Force. Like it's just a very important base. I don't know if it's the biggest base or what. I just know it's a very important base for our Air Force. And they are responsible for the future of the Air Force, the future of the military in some ways. Because yes, there's Air Force. It's mainly an Air Force base. But there's other branches on all the bases. This means that they are testing everything that they haven't really put out into the Air Force yet. They buy all the planes through the offices on the base. They're working with all the intelligence that is needed for the future. They have a history of duplicating Russian equipment, German equipment, whatever they can get their hands on, and basically reverse engineering it. So where better to have UFOs than that base? They designated a hangar to UFO research, and that hangar is Hangar 18. After the wreckage was recovered from Roswell, it was taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. At the time, it was called Wright Field. It wasn't Wright-Patterson Air Force Base yet. Anyway, so after the wreckage was recovered from Roswell, it was taken to the Air Force Base. And we all know that things were shipped to Wright Field because people on both ends of the shipping were kind of talking about it. Like people from Roswell Army Airfield were like, they're sending all these things away. And then all the people that were receiving all the things on Wright Field, they were like, that's weird. These came from Roswell. And these people didn't really know, like the people that were shipping it, they didn't really know what it was because it's top secret. You're not supposed to know. But they could see where it comes from at least. And there's also there's a declassified FBI document that was dated for the same week of the Roswell incident that provides ties to Wright Field. The document stated that the debris resembled an air balloon, which at the time was a top secret project, like I said, but it also stated that it's too hard to verify if it's really like what it is, so it was flown to Wright Field for examination. Which seems odd, but okay. After the wreckage arrived, the class of 1947 from an elite airman training facility, the prestigious Air War College, was flown to Wright Field as well. And they were there to investigate the wreckage. So these were like pretty experienced pilots. One of the men in this class, he had flown many missions in World War II and had quite the reputation. And his name was Merriam Magruder, but his call sign was Black Mac. And because his reputation preceded him. So Magruder recalled many of the things that he had seen in Hangar 18 because remember, they're there to investigate what is all this stuff. So he saw this really like pliable metal. You could like wrinkle it up in your hands and then it would go back to its original shape. And it was super light, but like you couldn't tear it. So no matter how hard you tried, no matter what they tried to do, like they couldn't destroy this metal. Even though it was really light and they could crinkle it, nothing would destroy it. He also saw parts of wreckage that he explained as extraterrestrial craft, and he saw bodies. He also saw like a living being. So he saw some dead bodies, but then he saw like this living creature. He explained the creature as childlike, with an oversized head, long arms, and only 4 fingers. And basically everybody that explained an alien at some point, that's kind of how they explained it. They have big head, and which is why when we do like alien movies, this is kind of what they base it off of. Big head, big eyes, they had weirdly long arms, and then they had these long little like finger type things with almost like some webbing between them, but there was only 4 of the fingers, and everybody explains it the same. And at first they kind of said they were greenish, and then somebody said like greenish blue more, until they kind of landed on like a gray type color of these little green men is what little gray men, little people. They're about 3 feet tall. And Magruder made it seem like we killed the being. It wasn't on purpose, but they were like experimenting on the thing, and it didn't really know, like they didn't know how to make it live. And also, if our air is toxic to them, eventually they're going to die anyway. But also, if they were in a crash, they could have been, like, this creature could have been hurt from the crash. And so it's likely that it was already hurt when they were experimenting on it, and then it just died from the experiments. And that's just me speculating. I don't know for sure, but that's what seems the most logical to me. Magruder obviously was not allowed to talk about this, but when he was old and sick, he finally did tell his children, and one of his sons basically came out and told the world. All the wreckage and recovered bodies were sent to Wright Field under what was called Project Blue Book. This is where the bodies and the craft from the Aztec UFO site ended up as well. But that's not all. There were many UFO crashes and encounters that all ended up going to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base that we don't really know about. I for sure didn't know about it. So there was a crash in Palisade Valley, Arizona in October of 1947. There was a Kingman, Arizona crash in May of 1953, Laredo, Texas, June 1953, and Kecksburg, Pennsylvania in December of 1965. But I mean, there's plenty more. Those are just some of the other like big ones outside of like Roswell and Aztec, New Mexico. These are some of the big ones that ended up. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter where the UFO lands or crashes or whatever. They always sent all the things to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and more specifically, Hangar 18. But, of course, after not getting any information about what was going on at the hangar, and the military basically keeping everything on the down low, public speculation just kind of waned and went away. I mean, people still, thought about it, but it wasn't, front news. People weren't talking about it as much. That is until 1978, when the UFO Symposium was held. And ironically, the symposium was held in Dayton, Ohio. So very close to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where all the UFOs are. So Leonard Stringfield is a UFO researcher who gave a speech at the symposium. He had a lot of sources leaking information to him. People were giving him these testimonies of things people had seen, people had done. And he would gain trust, and then they would give him information. But because he had done this with so many people, he could compare information across multiple people and determine what was real, what wasn't, and he gave this speech. Stringfield wrote numerous books on the topic, but of course, because of the secrecy involved, many of the sources either didn't want to be named at all or only wanted part of their name published, which actually had kind of an adverse effect because some people were well, we can't verify your sources. Whatever. Stringfield had shared a story in his books about a Navy pilot who was identified only as PJ and who had wandered into a restricted hangar by accident. He was there with a couple other Navy pilots as well. He confirms that, PJ confirms that he saw a disc-shaped object that was metallic in color. He said it was about 15 feet wide, about 8 feet deep. The pilot and the others he was with were confronted by guards and escorted out of the hangar. But Stringfield wasn't the only one with stories. Other people started popping up all over the place. In 1997, James Clarkson, who was a UFO researcher and a police detective, tracked down a lady named June Crane, who was a former employee of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base during the Roswell era. Her story collaborated one from earlier, where she was a clerk typist with access to top secret information. And in her audio interview, she recalls one of the men he brought her this like piece of metal and asked her if she could tear the piece of metal. And she said that she picked up the metal, which fairly thick, but felt, quote, light as a feather, and she crumpled it and it would return to its original shape. And she couldn't tear it, she couldn't destroy it, nothing would change with this piece of metal. When she asked the soldier where the metal was from, he told her that it was from a spaceship and he had just gotten back from New Mexico. Crane confirmed 3 UFO crashes that she had heard about during her time, because remember, she has access to top secret information. The Roswell incident was one of them, and there were like 2 others. I'm assuming that one of those 2 others was the Aztec situation. But as of 1953, they knew about 3 crashes, 3, I'm saying big crashes. I don't know, because there's obviously a bunch of little crashes or just a bunch of things that they collected. She confirmed that one of the crashes, they recovered 2 men and put them in the icebox. She said, quote, he called them little green men, then he described them as greenish blue. They were 4 feet tall and they were dead. And I'm not sure who he is, because she kept saying he called them. I don't know who he is. June passed away in 1998, so just about a year after she gave this interview. And she was 72 years old when she gave her interview with Clarkson. So she was old. Like, she was ready to reveal her secrets, to talk about all that. She basically like decided that if they put her in prison or they give her a fine, because at the time she was liable for a $10,000 fine, which probably would have been like $120,000 today. But she figured she's an old lady now. What are they going to do? She could go to jail. She could have a fine. She'd be fine about it. So that's when she came forward finally. During like the same time as like Project Blue Book kind of like went away. Then they had this other project. It was called Project Moondust. The goal of that project was to recover objects and debris from spacecraft. But the thing is, it didn't matter. Any kind of spacecraft was fine. Like anything that went up and landed in a space where we could collect it, we did. So they were trying to exploit the discovery of Soviet hardware when it fell into American hands, but also spacecraft. So they're basically collecting anything that would fall from the sky onto American soil. For example, when like a Soviet satellite fell, they collected it, or a piece of Soviet missile, a piece of like a space launch vehicle landed in the area we could get at. This could be planes. It could be whole things, just fragments. They didn't care. They were just collecting space junk. This would include UFO pieces as well. Anything that fell from the sky, they were collecting, because they wanted to reverse engineer all these things. They wanted to figure out basically what are the Soviets doing and what are the aliens doing? What can we do to be better prepared for this Cold War, or basically any war moving forward? Wright-Patterson Air Force Base did have a low-temp storage for biological specimens, and they did experiments on monkeys and apes in their anthropoid lab. But that just seems like a really good cover for alien bodies. So they have these like low-temp storage areas, and Miss June Crane had said something about them keeping these bodies on ice. Well, according to Stringfield's anonymous sources, one of which being a former naval intelligence officer. Wow, that was really hard to say. 4 bodies were being stored in the hangar. They were being kept at a negative 120 degrees for preservation. And of course, like I said earlier, people wanted to confirm what Stringman was saying. They didn't want to just take what he said as like what it was. They wanted to confirm, but a lot of the people wanted to remain anonymous. But honestly, like if I was one of the sources, I would want to remain anonymous as well, because like the government will kill you for sure. So why haven't we seen any UFO crashes since? I'm glad you asked, because I had the same question. Well, I have a couple theories. So first of all, I don't think they meant to crash. Like the UFOs that did crash here, I don't think they meant to. I think they were just supposed to like be observing our planet. They, the human race, whatever. When they crashed, they weren't really supposed to land. I think they were just doing recon. and then they accidentally crashed, which makes sense. I mean, who crashes on purpose, right? Secondly, we experimented on them. So, of course, they wouldn't want to come back after that. They're like, we're never landing there if they're going to treat us like that. Thirdly, I don't think they haven't come back. So I know many people have seen UFOs in the sky, things they can't explain, things moving in the sky that don't move the way like our aircrafts move. Also, if they have crashed, I think the government's just so much better at covering it up and not allowing the public to know. So if there are more UFO crashes, we just don't know about them. I think they've for sure crashed. I mean, obviously, if they've crashed once, they've crashed a couple times. Look at us with cars, right? You crash once, there's going to be 100 times that, 1,000 times that. Well, I think UFOs are for sure crashing. We're just better at covering it up, or people just aren't talking about it, which is weird. I feel like I would want to know, but it's fine. But also, humans are mean. Look, like, if we have these aliens in our atmosphere or in our solar system, they're watching us, they're doing recon on the human race, they're looking at us like, wow, they're gonna go to war over something so stupid, something so small. And I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not always stupid and small, but we go to war at the drop of a hat for anything. So they're probably looking at us like, well, if we land there, they're for sure gonna attack us, they're gonna go to war with us. So I mean, if I was an alien, I wouldn't land on this planet. It's scary. It's a scary place. And it's not always scary. People are nice, people, but I feel like the nice people are heavily outweighed by the mean people. So that's a bummer. But next week, because this is already kind of a longer episode, I'm going to tell you my UFO story. And obviously, like I shared on Instagram, I would love to tell your UFO story. So if you want to send me an email or a direct message on Instagram about your UFO story, I'll share it. And we're also going to talk about what happened the night of the Super Bowl, because a lot of people are talking about the UFOs the night of the Super Bowl. And I'm just saying, this isn't a small thing. People have seen UFOs all over the place. And so one of my friends recommended a Netflix show. I think it's not the whole show. I think it's one of the episodes in a show about an entire town seeing a UFO. But I'd like to share more personal stories. So if you have a UFO story, send it my way, because it's cool. And here is a judgment-free zone. If you've seen a UFO, we want to know about it. So until next week, my friends, stay skeptical, and I'll see you all soon. Hey friends, The Rabbit Hole is an independent podcast with everything you hear done by me, Danny Mercy. I appreciate all of your support. Please rate and review wherever you're listening. If you want to follow us on Instagram, it's at rabbit.holepodcast. And thank you, Zakar Balaha, for our awesome intro.